Welcome everyone to Resilience, Real Challenges and Breakthrough Moments with myself, Stephanie Melodia and Brian Meece. We are both mentors on the Oneday program, as well as all the other hats that we wear, which we'll get into in today's conversation. Brian Meece is a mentor at Oneday over in the US and the founding CEO of GreenlightGO, a dual-sided marketplace for film and TV producers, which provided on-demand facilities and services for content creators globally. The venture has driven $20 million in top-line sales, facilitating over 250 TV productions for networks like Netflix, Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, and others. So a little bit of name dropping there, which is fantastic. Previously, Brian served as entrepreneur in residence at Citi Ventures D10X program within the global consumer banking and institutional clients group, and coached more than 50 startups in FinTech. As co-founder and CEO, Brian launched RocketHub in 2009, and within just 7 years, exited in a deal worth $15 million by a publicly traded company. Brian, if we had all the time in the world, I would want to ask you a million questions, but I would definitely want to ask you about exiting in 7 years. That is extremely impressive. But for now, let's rewind the clocks a little bit and start off with GreenlightGO. So that was what I described in the intro. What was the genesis for that idea?
Sure. So I kind of started with RocketHub because I love how a lot of our adventures in life, they kind of, in a weird way, kind of meld together as we continue to go down the trail. So when I was at RocketHub, I had the opportunity, I'll never forget it. We were sitting in our startup office in Harlem, which at the time was, just an empty room with folding chairs. It was like maybe 3 or 4 of us working full time at the venture at that time. And we get a call from A&E Networks. And the call was something like this. Hey, y'all, we're A&E Networks, and we're interested in doing some promotional marketing and content creation around entrepreneurship, creative entrepreneurship here in America. We were hoping that you and your team had some time to come down and talk to us about a potential collaboration around a documentary and maybe a tour where we can maybe set you up with some of the different stars of our shows. We have a lot of shows around entrepreneurship, and we thought this might be something that would be a win-win for you guys as a startup and for us as a network. And so the response that I gave to that call was, when can we be there? Like I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'll drop everything we're doing to be there. Ended up being the beginning of a really wonderful relationship, a couple of year relationship that I had with some executives at A&E. So long story short, they made this documentary around us. They did a tour with us. And they thought this might be fun for a potential television show. And so with that in mind, they went and introduced me to some of their top producers that were making shows like Pawn Stars and other, big TV shows that were the big hits on A&E. And that's how I started to meet folks in the upper echelons of the film and television game. So after we, put the documentary out, we ended up they were really excited about a potential show opportunity, because at that point we had about 15 million users at RocketHub. And they were like, we think there might be a show here, right? So when they put out the documentary, everybody was super excited. We promoted it like crazy. And then when the documentary finally came out, there were about 15 people that tuned in to watch it. And I think 10 of them were like my family members. So speaking of resilience, they're like, we love the documentary, but we ain't doing a show, right? So, we'll continue the tour. We'll continue, doing what we're doing now, but probably not going to do a TV show around this, considering the Paramount was a little lighter than we had hoped. But I ended up staying in touch with Colby Gaines and Michael Hirschhorn, who I'd been introduced to through that process. And years later, after I had sold RocketHub and was working as an entrepreneur in residence at Citi Venture, those two reached out and said, "Hey, we've got an idea in the media space. Would you be interested in listening to it, digging into it, and potentially quarterbacking it? We're in the business of creating TV shows, not launching startups, but we'd love for you to quarterback this with a partnership." And so That was the genesis of it. But like many of these, resilience plays, when one door opens, another closes, and all this energy kind of builds up and morphs into like the next thing. So that's one of the takeaways of the partnership that we had with A&E Networks, is I got to meet all these amazing film and television producers, and then I got to work with them on the GreenlightGO side. So it's been really cool.
We were discussing beforehand about the idea of a CV of failures. So the normal CV, obviously we talk about our achievements, what we accomplished, what we were, everything else, but actually there's this idea, it's kind of, the equivalent with business is your pre-mortem. So before the business dies, the post-mortem, before your pre-mortem is what's going to kill the business, not to induce any unnecessary anxiety, but to get on the front foot of what could we do. So similar thing with the CV of failures, it all sounds very doom and gloom, but actually it's an interesting exercise, because to your point there, Brian, there's these situations that don't quite work out as planned, but at the very least you've learned something, but really it's got you to where you are today. And maybe things have happened for a reason, but it's you're obviously doing okay for yourself.
Well, it's easier on the other side of it too. So, speaking of CV of failures, I thought about that question, and I'd like to share just kind of something that's like deep in the past of the family tree of the Meece family tree. So a lot of folks don't know this, but if you got any, and feel free, we could kill this picture of me I'd rather see the pictures of everybody else. We could feel free to kill the mug shot of me there. That's much better. Thanks for that. But the going back into the Meece family tree back in the 1800s. First of all, any fans of ketchup? Anybody like ketchup? If anybody likes ketchup, light it up in the chat. What you like to put ketchup on? I like to put it on eggs, hot dogs, obviously. I don't put it on steak because I'm not 9 years old. But let me know. Yeah, there you go. Fries, and that's the obvious one. Davita, thank you. But if you like ketchup, let me know what you put it on. Maybe a couple of odd things you put ketchup on. But James Meece was actually credited in the early 1800s. He invented the modern ketchup. So prior to James Meece's recipe, ketchup was British and it was mushroom based, which I'm not gonna pick on any of the British food, and that's not what we're here to do. But that just sounds, unappealing to me. So I think James was on the right path of starting this ketchup, with tomato base. So that was his big claim to fame. So what he ended up doing is, it had a lot of different stuff in it. It was tomato based, but it had, sardines and capers and all these things in it. And he had a pretty good run with this ketchup biz up until about the 1850s, when this with the last name of Heinz came along. And he was like, you know what? I'm going to strip all this other crap out of it. I'm just going to do the tomato paste and the vinegar. And the rest, as they could say, is history, because they ended up having a pretty good run off of that, off that innovation. But sometimes it's just fun to realize that you're going to have these like peaks and valleys, and sometimes the success that you have, it could be fleeting. Sometimes the failures you push through, and on the other side there's something amazing. But I think when we're talking about resilience, it's the ability to just keep moving forward, and doing so with some proper data, right? Let's not be crazy and just keep, if it's not working and we just keep doing it, that's probably not the best definition of resilience. But looking for the openings and looking for like the pathways, and looking at the data to say, hey, look, I'm on the right track with this, I think is a really big piece of resilience. So in my own failures, and I got somebody on my squad here, Melissa. So she knows this, and a couple of other squad members know this too. But I spent the first, 8 to 10 years of my life as a creative. So that was, what I played in bands. I was in, touring. You can still find my music on Spotify. If you want to, Google my name on Spotify, you'll see that. A much longer haired, thinner version of me from back in the day, playing indie acoustic songs. But I did that for about 8 to 10 years. I made indie movies. I made a couple of them that were features. I had, backers, ran shows with United Artists. They were all failures. Every single one was just a big, failure right after the next. And what was interesting is when I finally said, you know what, I want to change it up. I want to work on a platform that helps creatives raise money in 2009. All that 8 years of failing as a creative really was the secret sauce that took RocketHub to be the third largest crowdfunding website in the world before it was acquired, because I didn't just have like 5 or 10 creative customers or, creative entrepreneurs or folks that I knew, not even just 10 or 20. I mean, I had like hundreds of like record labels, bands, independent movie producers and filmmakers, festivals that I had worked with, that when we launched this website in 2009, they jumped in and they really brought a lot of life to that community. And so I would never have had the success with RocketHub had I not spent that, 8 to 10 years, playing in indie bands and making movies and, touring in a van and selling CDs. Yes, that's what, dating myself here. We sold CDs back in the day. But the resilience piece is a really important one to realize, that sometimes these chapters that you don't see the upside right away, like they could feed into the next thing, and they could be part of the secret sauce that makes the next thing really work well.
Yeah, Brian, that is so interesting. And I think a really important takeaway I just want to underscore for everyone who's joining in the Zoom today is, in the moment, it feels awful. Like, it feels horrible. And especially if it's been your childhood dream, especially something like being a musician, I can imagine you kind of had those dreams as a kid, right? To be a rock star, and you fail and fail, like rejection is so, it feels horrible. No one wants to endure it, but it is a necessary price to pay to be an entrepreneur, to be in sales. But let's just stick, there's so much I want to unpack, Brian. So what I'd love to just dive into while we're on this part of the story is, if we go back to those days with you being long haired, a bit skinnier, playing your music, what did you do kind of mentally to get yourself out of that childhood dream and embrace more of that scientific approach? So that's something that I love with the Oneday program, is applying that scientific method. Or you talk about data, what are the findings, what do we do here, where's the gap in the market, versus that inner passion and design, you just see it's not working.
That's a great question. And it's again, if I got squad members in the house, which I know I do, they've heard some of this, but I didn't listen. I was so headstrong,
Right.
and dense that it took me 8 years, right? So and when I put out RocketHub, by the way, those hundreds of folks that followed me into the website, signed up, were using the website, they were giving me all this feedback. And Stephanie, you know what my response was? They don't know what they're doing. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to make the button over here. It's good over there. Even though I don't need to have it do the way do the thing the way that they want it to do. And after 9 months of just, this is how ravenous these customers were. Granted, the internet was a lot smaller back in 2009, 2010. But finally, once I started listening to them and implementing the changes that they were asking me on the website, we saw immediate exponential growth. Immediate exponential growth, where we went from like kind of an interesting product where I thought we were doing really well, to like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like it was like absolutely insane. Like you could feel the liftoff happening.
Yeah.
And that was the light bulb moment. It took me almost 10 years.
Yeah.
For that light bulb moment to hit, where it's like, wait a second, I don't have to create my way through this. These users have the answers. They're telling me what they want.
Yeah.
They're telling me what they want. And then it was all, and then I started getting into the lean startup, and it was a game changer. But I like to tell the founders that I work with is that by working with them, one of my goals is they can just save them some brain damage and a whole heck of a lot of time to get there faster than I did. Because I spent a lot of time just thinking, well, this is how you do it. It just takes time for but if I just keep playing the shows, and was also really, that something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And was also really interesting, Stephanie, is that once I stopped kind of pushing one way with the music, for example, I went to New York. I was working at RocketHub, I was growing RocketHub, and I started playing shows with this group of folks, this band that we ended up cobbling together. and none of us were really taking it all that seriously. And we became so much more successful than when I was grinding it out.
Yeah,
And it
interesting,
was like,
interesting.
and it was, through our community. And that's one of the things I love about Oneday too, is that all these people that are on this, on this call, and I've had the privilege of talking to a lot of them. And I look forward to talking to a lot more of y'all. And there were so many opportunities for, my music, which again, I never had a bunch of financial success with it, but, from opening up to, groups like the Violent Femmes, or like having my music played in TV shows, all that stuff happened from like the audience that I was creating around the music in New York.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because of my efforts. It was because people felt a connection to what we were doing. And it
Mhm.
wasn't about like my stuff, it was like a very different mental thing. And I just also had no outcome. I was like, I'm just going to just do this and see what happens. And so, the other thing about resilience too, is like changing up your energy and your approach, can also, can also impact sometimes the outcomes. I found that with music specifically, I found a lot of success when I tried less, which seems really weird.
No, I totally get that. So much to unpack there as well. And I just want to highlight, if anyone is taking away one single message from today's call, it's what Brian just said there around what you just essentially described was product market fit. And I think it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I could talk for hours just on that concept of where to draw that line between entrepreneurial vision, determination, persistence, versus, how did you describe it, Brian? Was it being too headstrong, the stubbornness?
Yeah, honestly, it was just not listening, but that wasn't working. It
Yeah.
didn't. It worked on building my network, right? But I probably could have done that in half the time.
And this is where
So,
hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? Because now in the position you're in, you're like, oh, okay, well, I was actually unintentionally, I was building this audience that then set me up for success for this business further down the line. But of course, during that time, you were trying to become a successful musician. So I'm just fascinated on this point. I want to stick with for just a moment. How, for all the founders that are joining, like, how did you know like when to stop? Like, how do you discern between like just giving up and not having enough determination, because you're like, is it just on the other side of that next brick wall? Do I have to keep kind of chiseling away? I think there's like this graphic, an image is worth 1,000 words. There's this illustration of someone that's chipping away and they give up like just before they're about to hit gold, versus your point of like, it took me 8 years to do and it just wasn't working. So how do you find that line? When do you know when to stop?
well, I think that's a great question for the audience. I can ring in on my POV with that. I've got a pretty specific one, but I'd love to hear from our community kind of when is it? What's the difference between being just kind of, blindly headstrong and being resilient, and getting the community's thoughts on that. To me, it's, now being on the other side of a few successful ventures and a lot of failed ventures, um, it's looking at the data and looking at the evidence that there is progress happening with what we're building.
Mm.
And part of it too is just being really honest with yourself and looking at the data, having, good mentors, which I was lucky to have, with RocketHub. Having a strong community around me, having good, partners that will, you know, mm, let kind of where you might have a peripheral block. They can maybe fill in some of those gaps. But I do think there needs to be some data to show, hey, there's something here. We just need to keep digging. Now, if people are telling you, hey, I don't like this product, I'm not buying this product, I don't want this product, and you keep, selling that product in the same way that in the same style and the same, feature set, that may not be the wisest, choice. But I do think that there's something around being committed to the process and curiosity of like, what is it that people want? And what was really interesting, Stephanie, taking the music metaphor, because I think a lot of people will get it. In my 20s, it was more about me and my music, my songs, my stuff, And then when I moved to New York, I hit, 30. And we had a completely different perspective with the band. It was we used to have a mantra. It was, we love playing music with our friends, for our friends. If you have an instrument and you know the songs, you can get up and play some songs with us. If you know the songs, you can sing along with them. We have parts where it was very like interactive and fun, drinking music, hangout music, nothing too fancy, nothing too artsy, but just like a lot of fun. And so the moment that we made it around the audience participation and the fans, if you will, and giving them a break from their hectic, busy New York City lives and giving them a chance to come up and do a song or two or have a moment without, which was kind of special, right? Some folks don't get that in their day or their week or their month or their year. We were offering that with our band experience. And then it was like, what's in it for them, and it completely changed everything. I remember in the music game, I was trying for years to try to get like my music in film and television. And when we crowdfunded our first album on RocketHub with the new band in New York, the one that we were trying a lot less with and having a lot more success with, I remember one of the funders, this was back in the CDs era, y'all, so I'm dating myself here. Yes, we had CDs even like in 2009. But part of like the reward for funding at like the $50 level was you put like your face on a CD. And we like all these little funders' faces were like on the CD, like in the cover art of the CD. And one of my friends, who I never knew that he was an editor at a very high level, he edited a lot of big TV shows. And he brought the CD into his edit bay, into his production office in Times Square in New York City, because one of his face was one of the faces on the CD. And so he had it laying in the edit bay, and he had a colleague come in to his edit bay, and he's like, dude, what's with the CD? Well, we're not using those anymore. He's like, oh, no, dude, check it out. That's my face on that CD right there. I've helped fund this CD. And he was like, oh, cool. And he picks it up. He's like, is the music any good? And he's like, yeah, it's pretty good. It's like a little bit of beach, a little bit of country all smushed together. It's pretty good. Yeah, I like to go see them play. It's a lot of fun. He's like, hey, I got a show. I got a 30 seconds. I got to clear real quick for a show. Do you think you could clear like some of this music for me and I could just put it on like this show that I'm working on, save some time? And he's like, I don't know, Brian's like a CEO of this technology company, RocketHub. He might be really busy, but I'll call him and see if he's interested. And so Jeremy calls me and he's like, hey, dude, I know you're really busy. You're running RocketHub, but I know that the band's just kind of like a part-time thing, but I'm sitting here, we're putting together this show, and there's a guy here. He's gonna like, wants to use your music for this show. It's just gonna be background music. They'll pay you, but I don't know. Is that something that you're interested in? And I was like, yes, absolutely, yes. So, but again, it wasn't me out there pitching my stuff. It was me bringing somebody into the process. Literally, his face was on the album, and that's why he was attached to it in a lot of ways. And so the more you can kind of involve your community and involve others in what you're doing and have it be kind of less about your own stuff. And a lot of this is, I was aging out of a certain era, being in your 20s and kind of thinking you have all the answers. So a lot of it was that kind of that timing as well. But that's another takeaway I would love for our community. I love for our friends here on this call to get, is that the more you can involve other people, like just the more ownership they'll have and the more doors they'll often open for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got two takeaways from that amazing story, Brian. One, I think, is the doing something a bit different, and that's genuinely a conversation starter, where you're feeding from that marketing perspective. You're not only involving your community, but you're also feeding them opportunities to bring you up in conversation. So it's very easy to retrofit the strategy behind some of those chance encounters, but that's kind of the purpose of this, isn't it? We learn from the failures, we learn from those successes. And then the second key takeaway, what I'm noticing is a bit of a theme from your other stories here as well, is being open to chance. When you got that first phone call that you described in that room in Harlem, and then that chance encounter with your friend, your buddy who was in the edit bay. So there's some of that as well. It's all very nuanced and complex. All right, so Brian.
Answer the phone. That's another one. Like,
Yeah,
just answer. That's a good takeaway. I love that we got
answer
a couple
the phone.
really. We got Melissa says, I think it's a part of your intuition where the doors aren't opening and where they are. Melissa, I love this because it's really kind of being in touch and honest with yourself a bit. So I think that's a great takeaway, something that I got better at as I got a little bit older, if I'm being honest. So I think that's a great takeaway. And then Sibel says the difference between softening balanced emotions enough to clearly see all the Yeah. So again, they're saying similar things here, which is kind of like, pulling your biases maybe out a little bit and just kind of looking at things for what they are, which is, by the way, still hard for me now, Stephanie.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Isabel, it's just still hard. I still practice. Like, I'm still working on it now.
That's
But
reassuring. That's reassuring.
it's just like it's like a yoga practice. You just get out there. Some days you're better than others.
Right, I love that. That's reassuring to hear, ladies and gentlemen, even Brian, we all still struggle. We're all still exercising those particular muscles. And what I would just add to that, with definitely more of that, pure one day hat on, is sometimes you've just got to scratch that itch. And I'm not keeping track of the chat, but please keep the messages coming in. I'm not sure if any of my squad founders are on the call as well, but we've spoken about, you've just got this idea, you want to bring it to life, and I think this is the beauty of entrepreneurship. How I define it is when freedom and creativity meet in servitude of a market demand or market need. And I think the problem with entrepreneurship these days is there are less barriers to entry, which is fantastic. We've got the internet, we can all kind of set up, digital businesses in a number of different ways, but it's just that first part of the equation. It's the creativity and the freedom. It's, I've got an idea, I want to do this, I've got this vision, I want to make it happen. And I'm definitely a victim of that. I think it's really fun. You can scratch that itch. It's that second half of the equation, creativity and freedom meeting in servitude of a market need. So it's that second piece, which is what
Huge.
we're here to do with Oneday, with this chat. And so I think that's where your next part of the story kind of comes in there, Brian.
Can I give like the word that I love there, Stephanie, is servitude, because that's kind of the hinge, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I didn't have in my, if I'm just being honest, like I didn't really have that in my 20s. That's why I had limited success, I believe.
Yeah.
I had a very, kind of narrow set of like what success, narrow perspective, I should say, of what success looks like.
Yeah.
It was wrong, I know that now, but you didn't at the time. And those things, those hits do hurt when they come.
Yeah.
But when you start moving into servitude, I'll
Not
never,
about you.
I'll never forget. I love that word. I'm so glad that you surfaced it, because I remember being on tour with A&E, and we were in front of like, a few hundred people that showed up in like Salt Lake City or something like this. And A&E they produced these amazing productions, and we had other stars from different TV shows, and they had, me up there as kind of this, panel forum kind of thing. And I'll never forget that feeling of like, wow, I actually have made it as like, not necessarily a rock star, but like kind of like a tech, I'm the tech version of that. And also big enough to matter, but still small enough to care, still kind of, here and involved. And like hundreds of people come out to like hear what we're doing. And I just remember, because we were serving them. We had information that was interesting for them. We had opportunities that were valuable for them.
Mm.
And that word servitude, I think that's the one that really changed my life. I'm really glad you surfaced that, because
Thank you.
that
Yeah.
really is the hinge.
Yeah. And
That's the edge for me.
my entrepreneurial experience stems from both my own personal ventures, but very much so what I've observed, what I've witnessed through working with literally 100+ founders and their scaling teams through my role as a VC scout. I have amassed a very vast array of data points over the years. And what that means is I've also observed the most common mistakes, the most common struggles. And that is one of them, that keyword again, servitude. One of the most common mistakes that entrepreneurs make, and like, don't feel bad if you're one of them on this call as well. We've all done it. We've all been there. And Brian is very
Oh yeah.
vulnerably and openly opening up about his experience. But you go into it, we all go into entrepreneurship with our own idea, with our own vision. But until someone else gives a damn, until someone else, wants to part with their hard-earned cash for you to solve their problem for them, then you're a real entrepreneur, because up until then, it's not about you, it is about them. All right, Brian, let's keep things moving. Ladies and gents on the chat, please keep the messages coming in. If you've got any questions, we'll save some time, maybe in about 5-10 minutes. I guess I've only got one last question to ask. So if there's any questions in the chat, pop them in there and we'll try and get round to you. Brian, the time has flown. My last question to ask you, I guess, is, continuing that theme of resilience, Can you point to any specific kind of rejection along your entrepreneurial journey that has really helped you to thicken up your skin and taught you an invaluable lesson that you haven't already mentioned?
Oh yeah. So
Spoiled
you
for
talked
choice.
about kind of the, and I'll bring it back to something that you teed up at the top of this call. So we launched RocketHub and sold it actually in 5 years. I stuck around as an employee of the company, but from launch party to
Ah,
selling it was a 5-year play.
Brian,
Now,
that's
along the
amazing.
along the way, so we were competing with some pretty big names, and along the way, we had raised about $500,000 from some super angels in New York, very notable. So professional money, professional grade money, and again, different era. At that time, that was quite a respectable raise, especially for a guy who's playing in bands ahead of like starting his, a technology company. But we had a very big, for us, Series A term sheet ready to go. And it was right before the holidays. And we were really excited about this deal. And I remember one of our key competitors, a week before we were supposed to close on our Series A term sheet, they announced the meaningful raise from even bigger investors that were East Coast and West Coast. And our investors said, you know what? We don't feel like you're going to have, all the dry powder to really compete toe to toe. We're pulling out. And so it was devastating at the time, right? You're heading into the holidays. And it was just like a total gut punch. It was definitely one of the lows, one of the big, big lows. And I remember, just how I felt like I had no energy. I was completely dead on my feet, couldn't even fake it at that point. Like, how there's a certain level of just fronting that you do where like everything's great, everything's going awesome. And I was like, I wasn't even bothering. I was like, man, this just I
Yeah.
can't even fake anything right now. And then a couple of weeks later, this conversation, it actually came from something that had been planted a couple of years prior. Was this company that wanted to buy us, and I kind of joked around. I was like, "Yeah, well, you better open up your checkbook, yada yada yada." And they were like, "Hey, we're really serious about that conversation. Can we pick up the conversation that we had a couple years ago?" And the deal we ended up doing, we probably couldn't have done as fast, and it wouldn't have, and I'll say once you take a significant amount of capital, you have to go bigger with your valuations, and it
Yeah.
becomes a much more complicated game.
Yeah.
So what ended up being this just absolute gut kick for weeks,
Yeah.
and zapped all my energy, ended up being kind of a blessing in disguise. Because
Mm.
I think that in the end, the investors that pulled out were probably right, and to do so, and it ended up being a more favorable outcome for everybody involved, in the end. It took a little bit of distance to kind of understand that, but it was absolutely, you know, thrilling then to be able to have more control of like, hey, we want to exit now and we want to do it on these terms, which actually made a lot of sense for us. And so we were able to do that because we didn't have the handcuff of the bigger money and the blue chip capital behind us. So it ended up being another blessing in disguise. Like, very, very fortunate that it played out that way. But I remember, you know, it was it was really, really hard. It was really, really hard to keep going.
Brian, I can feel that gut punch just listening to your
It was
story,
brutal.
and I have to share something else with the group as well. And you too, Brian, you'd be amazed, or maybe not, considering your experience. Through my podcast, I've done numerous interviews. I'm now up to like 30 something, like interviews with founders. And again, that's also provided me with another kind of set of data points and uh, an interesting experiment. And one of the things that's come out of that is, to me, how shocking it's been to hear similar stories of an investor pull out at the last minute. And I was at an event the other week, and I was at this panel where they interviewed somebody else, and they had a similar kind of story. It's like, oh, damn, okay, this has just kind of been brought to light these past few months, but obviously it's something that's been happening a lot more that I wasn't aware of. So a word of caution to people as well, until the money's in the bank, like, don't start hiring, don't start investing. You need, like, anything can still happen. Um, Brian, but I love, again, just to really highlight the most important message with that last anecdote there, which is blessing in disguise. It won't feel like it in the moment. It's a punch to the stomach, but time, distance gives you that perspective. to
And
get you on the
and
right
also,
path.
well, I mean, I appreciate that, and I'm seeing some great, yeah. So Tavares, yes, that was with RocketHub. It ended up being the best thing that happened to RocketHub because the investors
Wow.
were right. And by the way, I wasn't living in reality. When it comes to like the reactions, like these things not going well, or like the reality was we had 15 million users. We were like, we were virtually in every publication the company was, or one of the founders were. We had been to hundreds of conferences. We had been to, in terms of that, I think somebody on our team totaled it up. It's not like I'm Bon Jovi where I've seen a million faces and I've rocked them all, but I've seen tens of thousands of faces and I've rocked a lot of them. I've rocked quite a bit of them. And it was like we had hit a certain tipping point where we obviously had value, right? But because we weren't on our way to being a unicorn, Stephanie, which was
Yeah,
what we were, that was the mentality at that time.
exactly.
We
Yeah,
felt like, oh, well, and
yeah.
it ended up being, like I said, a blessing in disguise. It changed my life in every way, and that servitude piece that was really the hinge, was really the pivot
Mm,
for me.
Interesting.
That shift, because
Yeah.
but
And
yeah,
just
so
just on the investor front as well, though, I think that's another. I've been having a lot of conversations around. There's so much glamour, not only around entrepreneurship, but also the venture capital investment game. And tech startups seem to be so intrinsically linked with VC, venture capital investment. But actually, in order to achieve a venture scale, I mean, ladies and gents, you heard this from Brian. He had 15 million users, rocked out all these conferences, in all these, but had all the press, but it still wasn't that venture scale. Venture scale is a term, it's a specific term in VC. It's that unicorn state. Is this going to be worth? Not only am I going to make my money back and then some, but is this going to return my entire fund? So have a Google of that if some of you are doing some tech ventures, just a little bit of the basics around VC, because that's a whole other thing. All right. Have we got any? I know you've been keeping eyes on the chat more than I have, Brian. You're much better than I. Have we had any good questions come in? Oh, I'm
we
catching
had
up with what people are putting ketchup on.
Yeah, well, that I appreciate that. I'm not sure if that story hit or not. Maybe I was digging a little too far into the past, Stephanie. I was just thinking that's, resilience.
Not at all, not
But
at all.
trying to really drive the long view in. Maybe going back 200 years was a little much. But I do see some folks around, questions around funding, which I think maybe you hit a stroke there, Stephanie. I do want to say one of the things I love about this community at Oneday, and one of the things I love about the modern era of entrepreneurship, is that having your own thing that works and has financial wherewithal is absolutely winning. And back in 2009, it was all about like the next Google, the next Facebook, the next, Pinterest, whatever big, big platform you could launch. And these days it's like, hey, can I enjoy what I'm doing? Can I provide value for an audience that I want to fight for? And make a living and make a good living doing that, and become wealthy doing that. And it was, it was, uh, just, it's just so much, it's just such a better environment. It's so
Yeah,
exciting. It's like, 'cause you
yeah,
could pick
yeah.
and choose. You want to be VC backed? Awesome. Go for it.
Yeah.
You want to do your own business where you run the show and you're not beholden to anybody? Awesome. I love that too.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we're,
I'm just
so,
seeing. Sorry, Brad, sorry, what did you saying? Sorry.
no, please, please. So it's just nice. As I say, it's just nice to be kind of where we're at, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think it just goes back to kind of the definition of success, right? And it's again that whole over glamorization of entrepreneurship, unicorn, VC. It's like there are as many different weird and wonderful, unique businesses as there are human beings. And your definition of success is only what it means to you. So don't get too kind of caught up in this whole other thing if that's not really what you want. I just saw a question from Tony Walker, if you're still on the call with us. He asked a bit earlier on, how did you get the customers in the first place? And what data/info did you have to make you decide to build the initial site? So I guess that's referring to GreenlightGO.
Right. So I'll do a quick one for RocketHub too. With RocketHub, I had a bunch of creative friends. It was 2008 was a financial crisis. None of them had money. We had all just been hyper connected in social media in the ways we had never been connected before. So the timing is really right for fan funding, crowdfunding, social funding. But I just had a lot of friends that I had built up with that. With GreenlightGO, Same thing. Comes back to your network or community with Colby and Michael, a couple of real heavy hitters in the world of film and television, tapping me to QB, an idea they wanted to deploy. I tapped into my network as well as their network. Mine was more on the indie side. Theirs was like CEOs of major media companies. So it was like really nice. It was a nice 1-2 punch. I was the one, they were the two, the knockout punch. But I was able to basically triangulate through community, through warm connections to get a sense of what the needs were for those customers. And so one of the things that I always look for is like, do we have access to these customers, or can we get it? We don't have to necessarily have direct access, but can we get the access to the fund to our customers, I should say. And that's a big piece of, why one founder could be successful with an idea and what holds another one back.
Yeah, I love that. Your network is your net worth, right, Brian?
That's great. Yeah,
I
that's
love that. Another question from Mr. Tavers Green. Is this what you already mentioned, Brian? Sorry, do you think it's advantageous to go for funding pre-revenue or to wait?
Well, I think it depends on who is this money coming from, Tavares. When you take money from somebody, it's like a marriage. You're kind of with them to the end, of the venture. And if you find somebody who really loves what you're doing and is able to give you terms that are, favorable and you like them, then awesome. But it's very, very difficult in this climate these days to get funding pre-revenue. It's a lot tougher to raise than it has been in the last couple of years. That is starting to change from what I could tell, but it really depends on who is the partner, and what is right for your business at that stage. I am of the bend, and this won't surprise Tavares because he's in my squad, so he knows how I like to think. Is that we control our own boat for as long as possible, and then we're we have leverage if we want to bring in somebody. We have the right leverage to bring in someone that we like at the right terms. We're not beholden to somebody else. And Tavares does this, and I know I'm going to brag on him a little bit because he's in my squad. And he does the same thing when he's forging partnerships. He knows what he has. He knows the value of what he has. And so when he puts partnership deals together, he makes sure that he's fair, but he also maintains a nice amount of leverage when he puts his deals together.
Oh, go to Vask. Everyone is bigging you up as well, Brian, on the chat. Tavas has said how appreciative he is of Brian is his mentor. Philomena wishes you would be her mentor as well. I love that. Brian is the goods, thrilled to be in his. See, oh my God, this is the Brian Meece fan club, isn't it? I love that.
Seeing some familiar faces, and I'm grateful that y'all are here. So
That's
awesome.
so cute. I love that. Unless there are any more questions in the chat, Brian, one more that I'll kind of end this on is what are some actionable strategies that you can share with the group today that help sharpen up that mental toughness when you're going through those hard times?
Well, I like what there was some comments back here. Let me pull a couple of them up. Sibel is just kind of being in touch with yourself. That's why I do a lot of yoga. It's kind of so you could kind of, as an entrepreneur, we're kind of the instrument that all of this comes through, right? So you got to take care of the instrument that's running the engine, right? And so by it might seem silly. I'll tell folks, hey, I'm going surfing for a couple hours, and they're like, what? Like what? But when I come back, I have a great idea, so or I'm refreshed to like go another 4 or 5 hours or whatever it might be. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and kind of in touch with things. And then let's use data and let's use reality. Let's choose reality, as I like to say. I wasn't choosing reality when that term sheet fell apart right before the holidays. I wasn't choosing reality, right? I wasn't looking at all the other options that I had. I wasn't looking at just keeping the business the way it was going. I was looking at one, again, kind of that mentality of like, I need to have a hit to be successful as a musician. When I found so much satisfaction playing for years in small New York City clubs for just with my friends, for my friends, that brought me some more satisfaction that I probably, I'm just so grateful for. I probably couldn't have gotten other ways, but it's about kind of being in touch with who you are, looking at the data, looking at the reality, and making sure that we have other folks around us, right? That's why I'm seeing so many, seeing, all my friends from my squads here. I'm seeing folks that I've had interviews with. I mean, this is all about what community is about. And having other folks to just challenge you, in a respectful way, say, hey, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? My squads are so excellent about supporting each other and also pressure testing each other. Like, hey, have you thought about this? Or, hey, you might want to think about this. And those kinds of dynamics are really important to have around you as a founder, because if we're just in our own heads, oh my gosh, without any outside perspective, it can spin off, off the rails. So I would say choose reality, take care of yourself, and surround yourself with folks that are going to help you sort things out.
I love that. I love that. We're getting some emoji claps in the chat. So fantastic. We've had a few more questions come in. So I think people needed a bit of time to warm up or time to get their fingers going on the chat. So from Davey, how do you know you are getting the correct data from your target customers? I've started doing my customer discovery and spoke to 10-ish target customers, however, struggling to see an obvious broken leg pain points from their answers.
It's a never ending process. So,
Hmm.
I wish I could say you talk to 10 and that's it. But
Yeah.
when I was building GreenlightGO, and Stephanie, you
Mm.
asked me about GreenlightGO, I talked to over 100 before I even got business cards made. I literally used the mom test. So anybody that's talked to me knows I'm a big fan of that book. And I used the mom test, and I went out and talked to 100 different folks to kind of get a need of what their pain points were. And what I also found was that while the problem that we were looking to solve was interesting, there were a lot of problems around the corners from those problems that I found through just discovery and conversation. So the first thing is just stay resilient about the audience. I know I've got Davita's in the house, so she's got a fantastic audience of a niche that she's working with and she's fighting for. Tavares does as well. Melissa does as well. Velvet does as well. Alpha, you're here too. They all have these audiences that they want to fight for and like learn about and stay curious about. A lot of my squad members, and that excites me because again, that's that servitude piece, Stephanie. It's not like, hey, my idea is I want to make a red cup and make it be a hit or whatever silly product thing that we're attached to. But a lot of my founders and ones that are in the room today they're just obsessed with their audience and making sure that this audience is taken care of and they're fighting for them. So you got to stay at it. That's the resilience part that I find is the easiest to kind of move forward with. It's like, all right, I'm going to just find out more about this audience. Let me stay curious about this crowd. When we put together RocketHub, we were fighting for creatives, right? Making and entrepreneurs, like giving them options to raise small amounts of capital to get these sparks of ideas going. And so, I get excited when I see founders that are curious and want to fight for their audience. And so I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, great question, Davey. Thank you. I think just to summarize and add some of my 2 cents to that as well is, so number one, I think is you need to speak to more than just 10 target customers.
Yes.
Secondly, is on a really practical note, is to have those conversations recorded. So not sure if you're already doing that, but if you're doing Zoom calls like this or Google Meets, have those recorded, especially with all the AI assistants that we've got now, like the AI note takers, because this sounds wild, but you think that and this isn't obviously to Davey personally, I don't know who you are, but to anyone on here, you think that you're listening, you think you're listening to what people are saying. And I can absolutely, hand on heart, again, I mentioned I have a podcast before. I do my podcast, I'm listening to the guest, obviously, I'm continuing the conversation and asking them questions. And then when I pick up my hard drive and I listen back to it for the edit, I am every single time I'm blown away about the stuff that I didn't quite catch that first time around. So I think, again, just on a really practical, a little practical tip there, have an AI assistant note taker that actually records the conversation, because then the other advantage you've got is you could then automatically sort of highlight keywords, key phrases, see if the same thing kind of comes up a few times. But again, that same thing, you need more than 10 customers. All right, we've got more.
If you have a chance, listen to Stephanie's podcast. I'm a fan as well.
Thanks, Brian, for the shout
Very
out.
good. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's squeeze in one more question, I think, before it's dinner time for us UKers. Brian, when facing a roadblock on a certain area of the business that you don't have expertise on, what path do you usually take? Any example you can provide when this happened, and how did you approach? From Daniel R. Thank you for the question, Daniel.
That's a great question. So
Yeah.
Daniel, This is just being incredibly resourceful, right? We live in an era where you can get a lot of information really, really fast. So I'll be very specific because you asked me for a specific example. I was interviewing logistics producers for GreenlightGO. Those are the demand side of our marketplace. They plug into the different facilities over on GreenlightGO, the sound stages and podcast rooms, et cetera. And what happened was when I was talking about my marketplace idea, again, my shiny red ball, ooh, wouldn't this be amazing? They had some questions. They were like, well, tell me about the paperwork. Can you streamline the paperwork between us and the facilities? And I was like, oh, um, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And they said, well, the whole legal process, it could take us a couple days, a couple weeks sometimes to get, plugged into these facilities. And it'd be nice if we just had some standard kind of templated documents where they were already pre-approved by the facility and the network for us to just, turn and burn, plug into these places and go. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, the path that I usually take is I ask a bunch of questions. That also led me to the question of, hey, what are the technical specifications of all these different facilities, and are they documented in a way that protects the IP from these different media companies and production companies? I was like, I have no idea what you are talking about. What are you talking about? And they're like, oh, it was a Sony Pictures movie that was hacked a couple of years ago. So now all these media companies are very particular about physical security and digital security. And so I instead of me saying, and Daniel, instead of me saying, hey, I don't know what you're talking about, I said, well, that's fascinating. Tell me more. And then I just filled up a couple of pages of notebooks of all the problems they had around IP and digital security and physical security for these shows, and Disney in particular is very protective. Like they don't want to have a Pixar movie hacked and leaked on the internet before it comes out, right? So I just got really curious and asked a bunch of questions. So I either will directly ask questions from the folks that have the pain, or I'll try to get myself in front of a subject matter expertise, an SME, as they call it in the military, see if I can very quickly extract a lot of information around a specific problem. And Chat GPT, actually not a bad answer. It's just going to get better and better. But I like to just get information around the pain point. I'll get the solution stuff later, Daniel, but if you can get an understanding of the pain to start, that's usually the more valuable piece of this.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Brian, thank you so much. I am just, yeah, I mean, I want to keep talking to you for many more hours. I have been so blown away by the fan club on the chat. Everyone is loving you, and I'm sure they would love to ask you more. Everyone who's joined this session, this has been our first official Oneday community event. So thank you so much for coming. There's a form that the link I've popped in the chat, or you can scan that QR code on the screen. Please do share your feedback, in the spirit of entrepreneurship and the Oneday program. We want to hear from you. What did you like? What did you dislike? Everything's on the table. Let us know. We want to hear from you. So thank you so much, everyone. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your incredible story. I'd love to. We need to do a part 2 next time.
I'd love to. I'm really honored for everybody that joined, and thank you all for being part of this inaugural, chat. And there'll be a lot more. So I mean, Onday's we got so many great mentors, Stephanie, that have got so much information. So I'm excited to join some of these moving forward too. So look for more of these types of events with the different mentors from Oneday. And also we're doing stuff with founders too. There's all sorts of stuff coming up. It's getting really cool.
Absolutely. You and I both, Brian. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please do share your feedback, and let's continue the conversation on the community Slack channel as well. Feel free to share what have been some of your failures, rejections that have actually proved to set you on the right path. That would be really interesting to hear. If any of you have had anything where in the moment it feels horrific, but actually it all worked out for the best. Let's keep the conversation going, and thank you so much for everyone's time. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.